Well, widespread major flooding across Victoria throughout October seems like a distant memory as warmer and drier weather now sets in. But for many flood-affected communities, the cleanup is still ongoing, including at Echuca, where the Murray River peaked at its highest level in nearly 50 years. Most of the town was saved by a man-made levee, but the aftermath of the disaster has revealed shortfalls in Victoria's flood emergency response and is prompting calls for a national strategy.
A community scrambling to save their town. A man-made levee holding back floodwaters as the Murray River rose to heights not seen in 50 years. This was Echuca in October. 6 weeks on, the first breach in what locals named the Great Wall of Echuca.
You've got to climb that levee. You've got to climb it emotionally as well as physically.
This 2.5 kilometre earth wall saved the majority of the town from inundation. But it could have been a very different story. Had they planned to build this levee here?
No.
John McCartney, an engineer, was contracted by the Campaspe and Murray River Councils as the project lead on a 4-year flood study for the region. His report was handed over just weeks before the flood disaster, but it wasn't given to SES volunteers on the ground responding to the flood emergency.
You should not have volunteers trying to coordinate an exercise of this extent. It's effectively giving a guy a gun and saying, go out, you're going to fight the enemy. No, we don't know where he is, we don't know what to do. Just go and point it and go for your life.
John grew up in Echuca and, despite now living 3 hours away, responded to calls from his brother Steve to help protect their hometown from going under.
The early stage, I described it as a circus. Sandbags going in weird places were never likely to flood.
Guided by his flood report and flood models, John liaised with the SES and directed volunteers on the ground, who, along with the community, built the massive levee in 48 hours.
Didn't see anyone from authority like SES or local council leading that. That was led by the community.
Emergency Management Victoria is the authority in charge of flood response in the state. But its Incident Control Centre was set up in Bendigo, 90 kilometres away, while on the ground, SES volunteers from out of town were in charge.
Can't do it from another town miles away. You've got to be here, see what's going on.
We should have heard from emergency management, we should have heard from local council. I think council's been asleep at the wheel.
It's really a role for the local council to be in charge of what happens on the ground here. They've got the information, they're the ones that have done the studies.
Over a week after the levee was built, the Campaspe Shire Council released this statement. Emergency Management Victoria, the lead agency in Victoria during an emergency event, made the decision that a levee needed to be constructed. Campaspe Shire Council was not consulted on the levee's location or design. A statement it stands by to this day. This wall dividing this Victorian community will continue to be broken down, but a greater division across Australia remains. A nation split over how each state responds to a flood emergency.
Disaster management in regards to floods in Victoria is, I describe as a broken down pair of roller skates.
Before Steve McCartney moved home to Echuca, he spent 20 years as CEO of 2 North Queensland local councils, leading the local government disaster management group.
Emergency services in Queensland are magnificent the way they get behind the council and empower them. Those scenarios of a disaster, fire, flood, major pandemics, all those things, the local disaster group is what takes control.
New South Wales was forced to change its emergency flood response after an inquiry into the devastating Lismore floods in February found residents were let down by the New South Wales state and local authorities. The report made 28 recommendations, including overhauling the now dismantled Resilience New South Wales. Now there are calls for the same to be done in Victoria.
We're very lucky this wasn't bigger than what they thought, and yet we still could have a bigger flood than this before this season's out.
Lucy Polkinghorne, Sky News.